Good evening and welcome to another edition of Special Assignment. I'm your host, Ashraf Garda. Another Women's Month is almost over, yet the issues affecting abuse of women continue unabated. The country in general remains victim to high levels of violent crimes, but statistics show that women and children in particular face the biggest threat in their own homes, not by intruders, but at the hands of their husbands or intimate partners and fathers. In tonight's episode, we expose how women continue to face challenges to obtain protection orders from courts or keep their children safe from their violent fathers. The story was produced by Adele van Niekerk. And a word of caution, some of the images on tonight's show might offend sensitive viewers.
It just started where he'll break hangers on me while I was pregnant, break hangers on me, pull my hair, smack me, kick me. Whatever he could get in his sight, he used to break on me.
Burning, battering, raping, forced impregnation, forced abortion, kicking people in the spine, cutting, shooting, hacking. These are the stories that come to us.
The police don't care. I don't think they are equipped. And I think in the situation of our country, it's a matter that there's so many of these cases. You know, it's just another case.
It is very unfortunate that there are myths that if a woman really wants to leave, she can get up and just leave. But the research and the reality is that it's not that simple.
Ina Bonet's case shocked an entire nation. It was one of the most extreme cases of violence against a woman by her intimate partner. Despite having a protection order out against this man, Ina's husband, Johan Kotze, he brutally tortured her, instructed 3 men to rape her before he killed her son. In another recent case, an Alberton father gunned down his 2 daughters and critically wounded his estranged wife a day after she decided to obtain a protection order against him. Although the women in our program escaped with their lives, they have their own horror stories to tell of violence inflicted by loved ones.
About a month after we got married, and we just found out that I was expecting with our son. And it just started off with him being angry one night, and next thing he was arguing with me, and then he smacked me.
Like all the other victims of domestic abuse that we spoke to, this woman, who we'll call Zahira, agreed to tell us her story on condition that we hide her identity.
You believe also maybe once the baby is born, things would change because he'll see his child and he'll just, change his mind.
But things didn't change. In fact, the assaults got more violent.
I was breastfeeding him and then we had to burp him afterwards. I had him on my shoulder trying to burp him. And the next thing, this man just got on the bed and punched me in my face. Where, my son was right next to him, he could have hurt him, he could have punched his head. But he got me in my nose where I started to bleed really badly. And then my son's clothes were full of blood. So he just took my son away, put him on the bed. And then he dragged me to the bathroom and he put my head under cold water, under the cold shower.
Experts say pregnancy seems to trigger more violent behavior.
We know statistically that violence often escalates and becomes more intense at 2 points in a domestic violence context. The one is when the woman becomes pregnant, and the second is when the partner who's been abused seeks external help.
Zahira's husband locked her and his son up in a dark room. They were being held captive in their own home. Her husband was seeking ultimate control.
I couldn't use the bathroom. I couldn't get myself something to eat. I just basically had to sit in one room with no windows open, no curtains drawn. Could never get our son anything to eat. I could never get anything to eat for myself. So things were really getting bad.
A male who is trying to assert ultimate power and control. We've got a woman who is developing a bond with this third party.
Dr. Esther Price, a psychologist lecturing at Wits University, says an abusive man's controlling behaviour will often escalate in the presence of a child.
A lot of it escalates because of feelings of losing control over the situation. And that's partly why they try to reassert it by really tightening that rein that they have over their partner.
Eventually, as our son got older, then when he used to drag me to one corner and want to beat me, I used to cover my face with my hands. And then he's like, "Are you acting smart with me?" So I'm like, "No, I'm not doing anything. I just want you to hurt me on my head." And then he would go and take our son and smack our son and said, "This would hurt you much more than me hitting you on your head."
I want my food.
After 3 years of isolation, violent assaults and emotional torment, Zahira realized that his son could play with his life. It gave her the strength to leave. But the extreme trauma and isolation already took its toll. Her son lagged behind in his developmental milestones. He couldn't walk or talk.
He couldn't speak. He made sounds, which is very disturbing for a child of that age. He couldn't speak. He couldn't copy words that we were saying. He communicated by making sounds and pointing. Hi, Vina. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this one? 6. Yes,
Preschool teacher Uka Collins says because of the isolation, the little boy's social skills were also highly impaired.
He'd never seen other children before. He'd never been to the park before. He didn't know what to do with anything, how to play with anything. He'd never seen swings or jungle gyms or sand. He was scared to touch some of the things. He was scared of our cats. He was just blown away by any kind of input and any kind of stimulation.
About 3/4 of the children have witnessed some kind of violence, or they have been the recipient of violence themselves. A lot of these children become very anxious, withdrawn, scared. They don't thrive as well as they should. Develop.
Since Zahira separated from her husband, the family court only granted her a peace order. Her estranged husband has since harassed and intimidated the entire family and threatened to kidnap their child.
When I go to the police, basically they said we should go back to the court, explain to the court what they did, and then get a warrant of arrest. That's the only time they can arrest him. But that's what we did, and then the court says, no, we can't arrest him.
And often there's a real obfuscation of information. The cops will say, go to the hospital first. Or they'll say, no, you have to go to the courts first. Or if you go to the court first, they'll say, no, you have to go to the cops first. So you get these real fundamental and banal but invidious impediments to the implementation of the Act.
We decide to accompany Zahira and her mother to the family court to get a protection order against her estranged husband. We manage to follow Zahira inside the court. Here we can see the court official who is supposed to process the protection order. He questions whether Zahira is facing any real threat.
What he's doing is the person has not acted, but the person is having ambitions to behave in a manner that constitutes unlawfulness or a crime. But he has not done it. He's here. He's saying, I will kill you. I will destroy some of your things. You see? He has not done these things. He's just making statements. You see, when people...
Here the court official can be seen as he continues the discussion in front of a colleague and also another woman who is at court to take out a protection order. Zahira's private details of her husband's violent attacks against her and her son are discussed in front of them. Despite all the information around her estranged husband's violent past, the court official accuses Zahira of keeping her son away from his father.
You can say all these things that you are saying that is disturbing your peace when you have his children inside that yard.
Zahira continues to explain her fears around her estranged husband's violent behaviors and his threats to kidnap their son. She informs the court official of the latest incident a few days ago when he arrived at her parents' house and threatened her family and domestic worker.
But the people that went to confront this man at the gate, to engage him on the matter of the child was not the mother. When we get home,
I'm sorry.
yeah, when you get home, tell your domestic worker to do the things that she's there to do. Matters that involves her husband until a divorce is granted. Tell the domestic worker not to involve herself, not to answer any calls from this man, especially if such matters are the ones that are going to be discussed. She must just clean the house. And if that man was going to stand at the yard requesting the child, tell your daughter to go and engage that man as the mother of that child, who she has conceived with the man who's standing at the gate.
Okay.
There is a spectrum of insensitivity that is incredibly damaging to the individual and her or his ability to engage the system. And that spectrum starts exactly from the first point of contact, which is usually the police. It's very much prevalent at the hospitals, and then of course when you get to the courtroom, if you get that far, there's a brick wall in front of you of agents and bureaucrats who believe it is their responsibility first to determine the veracity of what you're saying. That is wrong.
Now the big question is, why do so many of our country's men assault their partners? We find out more after this.
Ek het die deur afgeskoop. Ek het my hare begin rondplik en my geslaan en my neus gebreek. Hy het sy kop gevat en my fisies op my gesig gestamp en my neus gebreek en op die grond rondgesleep met my hare en as hy bloed sien dan is dit net of hy erger word.
Brenda shows us the evidence of injuries inflicted by her former husband during their 10-year marriage. He also raped her, threatened to kill her, kept her captive inside the house, cutting her ties with family and friends. Her children did not escape his brutality.
En die kind het al geslaap, het was seker 12:01 in die oggend. En hy het my kind wakker gemaak en hy het vir hom gesê hy het met die kind geseks. Hy het die woord seks gebruik. Dit is 'n graad 2 kind en toe het hy sy klere alles uitgetrek en hom geslaan met 'n beld met die bakkel se kant aan die voorkant oor sy kaal lyfie. En toe kom ek op 'n stadium met die kamer uit. Toe sien ek hoe slaan hy my kind en my kind staan nakend in die kombuis. Toe skree ek van ag nee my God man, wat doen jy? Toe los hy hom, toe gaan hy kamer toe. En die volgende oggend mag ek nie my kind gesien het nie. Daai nag het ek gevlug.
1 in 4 women like Brenda are subjected to violence by intimate partners who often have strong and manipulative personalities. Over the span of their 10-year marriage, Brenda often reported the case to police. She says she left but returned more than 30 times, and although she got 2 restraining orders against him, she would later withdraw them. Experts call this the so-called revolving door syndrome.
Your abuser often will regret what has happened, beg for your forgiveness, and promise you it'll never happen again, which often means that you'll stop the investigation or withdraw your complaint.
One looks at the cycle of violence where it starts off with very minor taunts and slapping, followed by the honeymoon period. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that, you mean the world to me, I love you, I need you. And so women start to believe that and they trust this person, they love this person.
Baie van die keer wat ek teruggegaan het, is omdat jy nie regtig aan die heenkome het nie en my familie het my totaal verwerp. Hulle het my gesê ek's van die duiwel en ek moes maar tevrede wees met my omstandighede.
We call that the revolving door syndrome. There's nothing to change that. It's going to happen, it's the phenomenon. Well, I should say, there's nothing in law that will change that. Perhaps in social work, in psychology, in parenting, in behavioral sciences.
After a decade trapped in a cycle of violence, Brenda managed to get one last restraining order and leave for good.
En ek het op 'n stadium het ek geleer om vrees uit my uit te kry. Ek het geweet hy floreer op vrees. As hy voor my staan en hy begin my klap met sy hand of hy klap my ore en ek begin bewe en ek ruk, dan het hy totale mag oor my gekry en ek het net geweet ek gaan ek gaan vrees uit my lewe uit moet kry en ek gaan hom moet vleis. En ek gaan vir hom moet sê, maar ek is nie bang vir jou nie.
Pastor Niels de Jager has been counselling victims and at times perpetrators of domestic violence for the last 15 years.
It's behaviours and behaviour patterns and ways of thinking that is culturally learned. So, in as much as a son learns from his father how to be a man, if his father abuses his mother, it's something that he sees as pseudo-normal. So then he would repeat the pattern.
In all his years of counselling, Niels says only one man came to him and on his own accord sought help. He agreed to speak to us, but once again on condition that we hide his identity.
Wat ek ook gedoen het en dit was 'n groot fout aan my kant. Jy weet, ek het altyd gedink ek het maar net gereageer op wat gebeur het. So jy weet, mense verontskuldig jouself altyd en sê goed, dit sy van die ander kant al eers gekom. Ek het net gereageer en ek reageer nie elke keer nie. Maar toe ek hier so na Domies die jaar toe gekom het, dat ek besef, jy weet, dis geen verskoning.
If there's insight into the situation, if the husband presents himself and he says, you know what, I have a problem, I need someone to help me. Please, I'd like to be helped. And if he submits himself to therapy, then I think you can move forward.
Dr. Esther Price says rehabilitation is a difficult and complicated process.
Over time, like for example, they found between 6 months and 3 years, people, for example, they found that some of the people on their programs, the batterers, are less likely to actually physically abuse their wives. But then what then happens is they become better at using other ways of asserting their dominance and control, like emotional abuse, name calling, verbal abuse. So they may not hit, but there might be an increase in other areas of abuse.
Ek dink nie as jy eers op daai vlak is en dit het gebeur en jy soek nie hulp nie, dan ek dink nie enige mens kan dit self uitsorteer nie. So ek dink ek het die regte ding gedoen, ongeag of jy weet geval het daarna of verbrokkel het en heeltemal verbrokkel het en of dit nie, ek dink 'n mens moet hulp kry.
In a moment, what's the rationale for courts to grant violent fathers access to their children?
Jenny was only 20 when she was trapped in an abusive relationship, pregnant with twins.
Asof jy half die idee gekry het, jy behoort nou aan hom. Jy's nou sy eiendom. Jy nou sy kinders, jy's swanger met sy kinders.
The assaults continued throughout her pregnancy and also shortly after the twins were born.
Hy het soos gewoonlik het hy vir my 'n bottel brandewyn gekoop, met die huis gekom, dit gedrink. 'n week na my kinders gebore is. Ek het 'n keiser gehad en ons het dan van ons hospitaal af teruggekom en hy het buite homself geraak.
8 days after the birth of the children, she came walking back home very, very early. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning. And then she spoke to her father and told him what had happened. And then we realized what was really, really going on.
Jenny got a restraining order against her husband and moved in with her parents. Within a few days, her husband came to their house, smashed her belongings in the street and threatened her. She called the police.
Die polisie het nog gestaan. En hulle het vir my gesê hulle sal teenwoordig wees om seker te maak dat ek het die hek toegehou, dat hy nie kan inkom nie. Hulle was teenwoordig gewees, maar het gesê hulle kan niks doen nie. Die enigste keer wat hulle kan optree is as hy fisies iets aan my doen.
You need a piece of paper that is respected in its content as much as its enforcement. One of the tricks, the beauties of the protection order, is that it has a built-in warrant of arrest. So if I, as a magistrate, issue a protection order, automatically I'm issuing a warrant of arrest if it's breached.
I don't think a protection order is worth the paper it's written on. The police don't care. I don't think they are equipped. They don't have the knowledge.
The trauma of the domestic abuse left deep emotional scars. Here, Jenny's children draw pictures of their current home. We asked them to draw a picture of their previous home, and this is what the little boy drew. The little girl's memory is an event after one of the violent assaults against her mother, when her father tried to hang himself in the family's presence.
Hurting somebody else in front of a child constitutes child abuse. Domestic violence in front of a child constitutes child abuse.
There is a duty to protect children and the elderly. There is a duty to protect. And that duty is something that we all ascribe to. So if the child is not feeling safe, I mean, that's one of the basic needs, then obviously there are going to be some emotional manifestations of that one will have to look for.
The twins were sent to a child psychologist for observation, and her recommendations were very clear. Their father posed a great psychological threat. But despite his violent history, the family court granted the twins' father unsupervised visiting rights.
Voordat hulle gaan, is dit 'n kwessie van broekies vuil maak. Nagmerries, sal nie alleen kamer toe loop nie, altyd iemand saam met hulle wees, die ligte moet aan wees. En as hulle terugkom, is hulle is kwaad. Daar's aggressie in hulle wat moet uit. Hulle raak verskriklik huilerig en as hulle nie huil nie, sal hulle op mekaar skree of mekaar wil slaan of sulke goed.
Oftentimes that abuse can actually carry on. I mean, and so it's important to look for signs of a child who comes back withdrawn, a child who comes back feeling tearful, anxious, clingy, separation anxiety is another one.
If there is a question mark that can't be proved categorically, surely the common sense response is supervised visits. Dad still gets access to child. Dad still has a relationship. And if that relationship is, in fact, violence-free, then the presence of another person doesn't complicate that. If the relationship is violent, then the presence of another person prevents that.
Zahira continues to fight what she feels is an impossible battle to keep her son from harm's way. In his case, also his father.
I'm forced to give him supervised visits. My question was to them, after the 6 months of supervised visits, what happens then? So there was a social worker with a family advocate, and she's telling me that supervised visits can't last forever.
So you put that all into the mix, and as a decision maker, you're facing violence from your partner. You have the interests of your children that you need to protect, as well as your own physical autonomy to protect. You're going to make choices that ultimately may contravene the law, but can we say that they're legal contraventions when the law and the system itself has not actually catered for your particular predicament?
So, what are your views on our courts and seeming inability or unwillingness of the SAPS to address domestic violence? Well, if you're tweeting, use the hashtag special assignment. You also have the option to post comments on our official Facebook page or to email us. Now, to end with, I've picked out 2 comments from last week's show on the practice of securitization by banks. Yanni Lacranja Facebooked, I wonder how many attorneys will know what to do with a case like this against a big institution. And Don Roberts wrote, banks should be taken to task over this type of business. I think it's fraud. Well, that's it for tonight. Join us again next week when we point out the issues that matter.